This is available both as a standalone product as well as part of CNC. So, the value that we're talking about today applies to both. And I'm happy to address that more at the end if people are interested. But to kick it off, my name is Jessie Wayne. I am a product line manager on the Crosswork Workflow Manager team alongside Lumendito, and I focus specifically on the router automation kit. So we'll be speaking about both today, CWM and its optional add-on package, RAC, or the router automation kit. And I'll be talking about how you can use CWM to sew together the entirety of your change management plan. So let's jump right in. I always like to start with why we're building this, what we're trying to address. So I've listed out some of the problems that we hear most commonly from our users. And we use this to give us the goalposts for what it is that we need to address when we're planning out and building Crosswork Workflow Manager and RAC. So to begin with, change management remains manual, right? The automation space is composed of different products, which are all very good at what they're intended to do and what they're intended to automate. The gap is that they need to be manually linked, which is both time and resource intensive. So that gives us our first goalpost here, right? We need to be interoperable. We need to build something that's east to west capable and that has a robust set of adapters so that it's capable of stringing together any of the products or individual actors that you have that make up the entirety of your change management plan. Secondly, complexity is an issue in this space, right? So the tools themselves can have high learning curves, so it becomes difficult to get to a point of meaningful use. And because of this, we see users who don't use the solutions because they're too intimidating from the get-go. And we also see users who abandon solutions because they start using it, but they can't get to a point of fluency fast enough. And that's arguably a worse situation, right? Both are pretty bad. And this is a two-pronged problem, complexity, because sometimes what we see is that to address this issue, users create their own change management solutions that are developed in-house. And this works great for a time. There's typically a dedicated group of individuals who've built it and understand it and are capable of maintaining it. But as time goes on, of course, that group might move on. It might become unwieldy and difficult to maintain. These are things we hear about all the time. So we want to build something that is intuitive, right? Usability is something we're really emphasizing, but it can't come at the cost of customizability, right? This is all about people's personal MOPs or specific MOPs to who they are as users. So we need to maintain that, but it should be something that essentially creates an easy button, right? So that anybody, even if they're non-tech savvy, can drive the change management process, ideally on day one, right? And finally, vendor specificity. This is something we've already heard about. I'm sure everybody is familiar with it. It's come up during developer days as well. You need multiple tools that do the same thing. So when we talk about multi-vendor, what our goal is there, we need to enable you to leverage the entirety of your tool set, regardless of who's building it. And the same goes for the devices that you're using in the field, right? So how are we going to do this, or what are we going to do with Crosswork Workflow Manager and the Router Automation Kit, right? So this is a good visualization of the relationship between the two. Crosswork Workflow Manager is the underlying driver, right? That is the workflow engine. It's vendor agnostic, and it functions as the thread that ties together your change management process. It's an east to west integrator, right? You're going to hear me say that a lot over the course of this presentation. And to that, you can add on this router automation kit. And RAC specifically is really good at addressing the complexity problem. I will get into that further on in the presentation, but for now, know that RAC is composed of 3 pre-built use cases. They're essentially pre-built workflows: fleet upgrade, golden configuration, and device onboarding. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. And of course, both are multi-vendor, right? So yeah, we'll dive into that a little bit more in detail. Let's start with the Crosswork Workflow Manager. So CWM's goal is to ultimately reduce the involvement of your operations team, right? So how does it actually do this? One, it simplifies your repetitive actions, right? So as an example of this, workflows are built to be modular. And again, you're going to see that later on in this presentation in greater detail. But for now, know that the MOPs that you're building out with workflow are pre-tested. They're broken down into very small pieces and they're easily repeated. And as a result of this, everything that you're using, you've already tested, you already have confidence in. So it becomes easier to build something that's more complex and more sophisticated, but you can still trust it, right? In addition, on the subject of simplicity, it has a nice UI. I've spent a lot of time focusing on usability for that. And it leverages the serverless workflow specification to write workflows, which is both vendor neutral and very intuitive to use. It's also able to validate what you're doing quickly. And what that means is the outputs of a workflow are returned and checked against pre-written policies to enable error and event handling. So workflows can have policies for declaring success or failure. And the results of those workflows can be summarized, which reduces human involvement, as well as the error associated with the human scanning CLI outputs. They can be stored as logs with products like Grafana, and it's capable of metric collection as well with products like Prometheus. It's built to be reliable. So specific example of that, CWM maintains state. And because of this, you can define specific recovery actions based on where you are in the workflow. And that's important because the recovery action that you might take might differ based on what step of the workflow fails. It might also differ based on the use case that you're using here. So if a use case targets the same action for 10 different devices, but only one of them fails, what is it that you want to do? Do you want to roll all 10 of them back? Do you want to roll one back? That answer can vary, and you're going to have control over that. In addition, workflows can notify management or messaging system of specific notifications, and they can be paused for approval. And this is something that we can emphasize with operator dialogues, which are introduced in CWM 1.2. I'll get into that a bit more on the next slide for more detail. And finally, of course, it needs to be an east to west integrator. That is the core function of any good workflow manager, right? So with that said, this slide visualizes how CWM automates broader change management rather than just the distinct activities, right? Like this is CWM functioning as that east to west integrator. And what it's essentially doing is lacing together all of the different automation steps, all the different products that you're using that compose the entirety of your solution. So like I said, east to west capabilities. All of these products are fantastic at what they do. They tend to exist in silos. So our goal is to create an easy button that implements the entirety of your change management plan so that you no longer need to manually link together the individual steps here. That is, of course, supported by a robust set of adapters. Adapters are really the meat and potatoes of how this works. So CWM in the adapter front provides a number of prepackaged adapters for general use. It also has one SDK, software developer kits, as well as something called XDKs, which are new with CWM 1.2, or extended SDKs. And these are used for the auto generation of specific adapter activities. So adapters for outbound integration that come as part of CWM are the generic DB adapter. And what that does is it adds the ability to integrate with databases like Postgres and MySQL. It has a set of custom adapters that you can build, or I should say it has an SDK that allows you to build custom adapters based on, there's an NSO adapter, but also based on REST, CLI or SSH, and email over SMTP. And finally, with these XDKs, these auto-generating adapters, there is an XDK for both NSO services and NSO actions, as well as an XDK for Open API. Now, in addition to this, CWM offers event handling and error handling. So for event handling, we are integrated with Kafka using AMQP and HTTP protocols to handle external events. And this means that CWM can handle incoming and outgoing events both. So incoming prompts can start a new workflow. For example, you can trigger a workflow from another product like CNC. On the other side of that coin, outgoing prompts from CWM can signal a start to other products like CNC, HCO, whatever else it is that you're trying to signal. So a good example of this are the operator dialogues. This is where I'm going to dig into those a little bit more. So operator dialogues are essentially pauses for input within your workflow. And what it does is it validates pre-checks and post-checks, requests additional inputs, requests confirmation to proceed, and provides a consumable summary of the workflow, the relevant information. And it does this, it's interactive, right? It's doing it with your user, but something you can do in a demo that we've actually built is a WebEx bot with CWM using Kafka that can solicit all of the steps I mentioned, like requesting confirmation to proceed, et cetera, from the user and even from their phone, right? But you're not bound to just WebEx. Any chatbot that you want to use can leverage Kafka events. And like I said, it unlocks a lot of flexibility on your part, right? I think I said just before, now you can do something like this from your phone. And really, these operator dialogues represent inflection points in your workflows process, right? So earlier on this track today, you heard Javier speak about the need for proactive decision-making, leveraging the AI tool set to enable that. And in the future, these natural pauses could be good places to implement ML-driven decision-making tooling, right? It's another opportunity to have less operator involvement. It doesn't exist yet, but it's certainly a good use case example of what you can do with these pauses. Finally, let's talk a little bit about error handling. So CWM is capable of both reversal and compensation. And what that does is it allows you to define what should be done to compensate for whatever kind of error has been made. And each step of your workflow can have specific compensation logic assigned to it. And it also has extended logging. So workflows are capable of generating their own log entries. And to close this slide out, it's a good moment to talk about why CWM is very well paired with NSO. And again, it links back to this concept of east to west integrations, right? CWM implements your change management plan. It gives visibility into status, input requests, permissions. It gathers data, pushes data, whatever it is you're trying to do. Then NSO can act on that, right? That's the intent-based system. We hear intent-based used to describe NSO all the time. And NSO from the CWM perspective is what provides multi-vendor ability. It drives a lot of the error and exception handling. It offers dry run capabilities. And when you link CWM and NSO together, CWM can link NSO with other software, and it ultimately becomes the entirety of your change management process. So for example, now you're capable of accessing info from other databases like configuration management data from things like MySQL and Postgres. And it's really about the whole picture here rather than any individual step. That's hopefully what the visual on this slide is communicating. Okay. So I also want to take a moment to talk about workflows as modular elements. So workflows are essentially building blocks, the way that they're put together in CWM. So what that means is you can build a series of small, distinct workflows that you can then assemble into a larger parent workflow. And this allows you to build, elaborate workflows that are very easy to maintain because ultimately they're composed of these smaller pieces that you've tested, used, and stored. So these are all pieces that you already trust, right? You're lacing together all the different automation steps. It becomes easier for the operator. And ultimately, the more that you trust these workflows that you're using, the further you can walk away. So if we look at this, this visual here, we have the workflow library on the left, and that shows three different, actually call them child workflows. These are three different pre-built workflows. You as the user can take these workflows, assemble them into a parent workflow, test the parent workflow, archive it, add it to your workflow library, and then of course, start the job. Because again, they're modular, they're reusable, you're ultimately confident in the actual operation of the workflow. And in addition to that, these pre-built workflows can be expanded by adding pre-execution or post-execution logic. For example, rack fleet upgrade, you'll see how we use pre and post checks on top of the classic fleet upgrade flow. So if a customer builds a custom mop, their mop can then be modularized and reused elsewhere. It can even be used as part of a different parent workflow in the future if needed. This is also a good moment to call out some of the organizational tools that are available with CWM. I mentioned earlier, it has a nice UI. It also has the workflow library here, which allows you to store the workflows that you built and tested for future use. It has the job manager, which allows for tracking of the scheduled, running, or completed workflows, as well as visualization of the execution details. It has tagging capabilities, so you can tag and sort your workflows however you'd like to. And finally, calendaring and scheduling as well. Okay, so what's new with CWM 1.2? We already talked a little bit about the operator dialogues. These dialogues are natively hosted on CWM, and there is a form designer that's provided for creating these dialogues within CWM. I also hit a little bit on the adapters. There are some new adapters introduced with CWM 1.2. In the XDK department, you can now generate activities representing NSO actions. So that means XDKs can now generate activities for NSO actions as well as NSO services. We also introduced the generic DB adapter, which allows you to interact with external databases like Postgres and MySQL. This enables you to read from a database as well as write persistent data to a database. Input schema validation. What this essentially means is the JSON input data for a job is validated against its input schema definition. And if needed, the job will then fail with an error for invalid input data. Wei actually showed an adapter that he built for this in Stockholm, but it's now built into CWM. So if you were there, you already saw a little bit of the value behind having something like this. And finally, we've upgraded Kafka to 3.3.2. So that was a bit on CWM. Let's talk now about RAC, and I'm going to reflash the challenges and solution slide here, just to refresh your memory. And I want to call out the complexity space specifically. If you remember at the beginning, I talked about how high learning curves lengthen the time to value for different automation products, right? So we're trying to build something that's intuitive and ideally usable on day one. Something that somebody who is not tech savvy can sit down and push a button and say, okay, there it goes. I trust that this is happening. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with RAC. So Router Automation Kit is this optional add-on to the Crosswork Workflow Manager. And it is composed of these 3 out-of-the-box use cases. So that's Fleet Upgrade, which is an image and OS upgrade workflow, Golden Configuration, which is an auditing and remediation workflow, and Device Onboarding, which is a provisioning workflow. So let's talk a little bit about RAC Fleet Upgrade first. So you can see from the visual here, Fleet Upgrade itself is essentially a parent workflow composed of several distinct child workflows. And some of the standout features for Fleet Upgrade is, one, it has a use case specific UI. Why is this important? It's dedicated to the specific use case, which means it's designed to walk you through the process, right? You don't need to be particularly tech savvy to get meaningful use out of Fleet Upgrade because of this. We've really emphasized usability here. But just because it's intuitive doesn't mean that it sacrifices customizability, right? You can see here I have the mop builder listed. It actually comes with 2 out-of-the-box mops, but the mop builder allows you to implement your own custom processes, depending on, everybody tends to have their own mop, right? So it's important that we support that. We also have software conformance checks, which enable you to select and enforce specific image policies that you can define. And we have these custom pre and post upgrade checks, right? And the pre and post upgrade checks, what they're essentially doing is comparing the differences between, the pre-checks and the post checks to ensure that you're only committing the expected changes when you're undergoing this upgrade process. And those are customizable. You can build whatever commands that you want into those checks. Finally, multi-vendor, right? You're going to see this across all of the use cases for RAC. Fleet Upgrade supports third-party devices, and the goal there is you only need to use one solution rather than many that are doing the same thing. And this is something we're really committed to. We are planning regular adapter releases that are decoupled and more frequent from the product releases so that we know we're regularly adding to the list of supported devices. Juniper is our next upcoming device support and our next release for May of 2025. And in the future, to close out Fleet Upgrade, this is a space where you can, again, implement ML-driven optimization tooling to make specific recommendations on what you should do with your upgrades. So, for example, recommendations on specific SMUs or P-certs, when you should schedule them, things like that. This is a quick sneak peek at the UI that we had planned for our next release. So this is for fleet upgrade specifically. If you were around yesterday, we actually gave a demo of this. Sri did a great job presenting and giving a walkthrough of this. But what you can see is on this first page here, we're looking at the list of devices. You can see, for example, there's some reports on the conformance checks, non-conformant or good to go, where they are in their fleet upgrade status. And along the top bar there, you can see there's a local image repository. We are also capable of integrating with things like CCO. There are the software conformance checks themselves, the MOPs that you have defined, as well as the jobs that you are running. And in this case, you can see that it's visualized as part of Crosswork Workflow Manager. But as noted at the start of this presentation, it's also something that's going to be available as part of CNC. In which case, it's the same UI, the same user experience, just housed within CNC. Okay, golden configuration. So what is golden config? This is an auditing and remediation tool, right? So ultimately, users can apply templates of any format to provision devices with their desired configuration, right? So it offers things like historical configuration records and scheduled audits. And it offers remediation actions as well. So for example, template reconciliation and redeploy template to make sure that everything is configured as you expect it to be. Template-wise, users can leverage C-style, which is associated with XR, JStyle for Juniper, JSON, or XML, as well as these native device configs in Jinja 2 templates. And if you're not familiar with Jinja 2, this is a templating language that helps users simplify what would otherwise be very complex configurations by having them define a minimum set of parameters. And finally, it is also, of course, multi-vendor. Golden Config already supports Juniper and Arista. Okay, and device onboarding. This one's pretty straightforward. We're automating the boot image upgrade and installation of your day zero configuration. It currently supports classic ZTP. It onboards the device into NSO, for example. And this can be used as a child workflow in a larger workflow. Again, we're talking about weaving this into a broader change management plan, right? So this is something pre-built, ready to go for you. And it also whitelists expected devices. This is a security measure, right? So nothing is going to be onboarded that you're not expecting to see there. And again, multi-vendor, right? We currently support Arista for device onboarding, and that list will grow. Okay, so where can you learn a little bit more about both CWM and RAC? So CWM, if you were in Stockholm this past May, you would have seen both the CWM introduction and demo and the RAC fleet upgrade demo, which I have on the top column there, or the top row there. We also have a CWM demo onboarding a virtual router to AWS, as well as building a utility function adapter for CWM using those SDKs. There's also a good demo of customizing the RAC workflows, right, to build them to or implement whatever MOPS it is that you're using. And finally, there's a great Crosswork automation and sustainability demo, which showcases WAY, CNC, CWM, and NSO. Lastly, where can you get CWM 1.2 as well as RAC? They are co-housed, so both are available on software.cisco.com. RAC is available there as an add-on to CWM. All of the documentation for both products is available on cisco.com. And then, of course, there's a great community around support and resources on both DevNet as well as community.cisco.com. So thank you so much. This is everything I had.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. Really exciting stuff happening with CWM. I mean, it's a fairly new product. You know, I think it's less than a year old or about a year. So it's really great to see, you know, all the new things that are getting added into it. So great job. I do have a couple questions, and I do have a poll set of answers. So the poll, which use cases are most exciting to you? And fleet upgrade was 18%, golden config was 64%, and device onboarding was 18%. So
Okay.
is that consistent with what you've seen from customers?
The golden config is a surprise. That's definitely a popular one, but typically it's fleet upgrade that we hear a lot about. So it's good to always, hear from the audience what it is that's interesting to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's a few questions that the folks were asking. Do pre-built use cases come as part of CWM?
Yeah. So that is uh Rack is an add-on to CWM, right? So Crosswork Workflow Manager, from a licensing perspective, there's CWM Essentials, which is just CWM, and then there's CWM Advantage, and that gives you access to both the SDKs as well as all three of those Rack use cases.
Okay, great. Is there a plan to add a UI for golden configs?
Yeah, so you mentioned this already. Rack is pretty young. It just launched. CWM is a little bit older, but Rack was just launched this past spring of 2024. So our next release is going to introduce that UI. I gave a quick preview of that for fleet upgrade, and golden configuration and device onboarding will follow in the subsequent releases. It's important for us to get those UIs out the door.